many of us even, at some time or another, have had a job in hospitality. Maybe you made coffees, maybe you pulled beers at the pub. It's not easy work. And we see a lot of young people in that industry. For me, I made sandwiches and coffees when I was in university. You might have done it part-time while you were finding your feet even somewhere else. Or maybe it's something that you've gone on to make a career out of. There's a lot to enjoy in that field. But new research from the University of Newcastle's Youth Studies Centre has painted what I find to be a worrying picture of gender-based violence and sexual harassment that young people in hospitality can go through. To fill you in, Dr. Julia Coffey is here, a sociologist at the University of Newcastle. Good morning.
Good morning, Jenny. Good to talk to you.
And you, what are the experiences of young people that you've heard about that have informed your report?
Well, yeah, we know that young people are hugely employed in hospitality. It's one of the largest sectors employing young people, and we have been conducting a study led by David Fruja, but through our centre for the last 4 years, which has explored the experiences of young people working in a range of different types of hospitality. But one of the main things that came through really was the prevalence of sexual harassment and, obviously forms of gender-based violence associated with that, including instances of abuse and, some really concerning stories. So we broadly looked at the gender norms in the industry. We looked at the experiences of queer and non-binary workers as well, and found that they were really expected to use gender as a key part of their work, in terms of relational styles of serving people. And, being smiley is something we heard all of the time. But then at the same time, the same sort of, flip side or underbelly of gender norms is that they can be associated with or obviously become a target for sexual harassment and gender-based violence on the basis of those gender positions. So one of the most concerning things we found was that despite, being victims of sexual harassment in the workplace, often women, particularly in bars, were expected, because of their gender positions of being, more calm or better able to relate to people, were sent in to manage the most problematic customers. So the same ones, essentially, who had been harassing them previously often. So this was something that we were quite perplexed by, because we heard it from so many people as though it was just, part of the course or to be expected. And we asked people to explain it to us because we didn't quite understand. And we really found that it was those same gender norms that were causing this problem and placing women in even more exploitative and risky positions.
I'll leave the solutions and problem solving to yourselves, the experts, but I don't know that, just putting it out there, I don't know who you'd call on in that situation to be the mediator or the person to calm down a situation, but it seems to me it certainly shouldn't be the young person who's behind the bar, I guess.
Yeah, we mainly found that this would happen in smaller boutique kind of venues, often ones that were kind of more alternatively positioned, I guess you could say, that didn't have security or it doesn't have to always be security, but really needs to have an overt strategy led by management as to what happens in these situations. It needs to be agreed on beforehand rather than just doing it on the fly, which is what young people often describe. They're like, it's just something we do, like we just do it. It's always in the absence of a proper plan led by the sector or by the venue for that matter. So that's one of our real recommendations, is that agreed upon behavioural expectations need to be set out clearly in the outset. So not just between, say, an employer and the worker, or even between workers in terms of their own behaviour, but to just designate what the line is and who should deal with it in particularly the most risky situations relating to potential violence between customers that workers, have to figure out somehow, but it should always be someone more senior or potentially with some training or some protection.
What else are you recommending then to the sector to improve this problem?
Well, I guess the key recommendation that many other ones hang off is that given the scale of gender-based violence in hospitality. You know, some surveys have put it up to 90% of young women having suffered sexual harassment in this industry. We really think the industry and the sector should be on the front foot and respond to the new guidelines put out by the Sex Discrimination Act, where all workplaces have a positive duty to prevent gender-based violence. So we think this provides an opportunity for the industry to tailor their own responses in line with those Sex Discrimination Act guidelines. There's a whole lot of resources provided through that, including formats for effective education and training, ways to address and improve leadership in the sector. For example, another, gender inequality in the sector is that whilst it employs a, disproportionate amount of women, very few are in leadership positions, so that's something that also could change as part of that. We also think there needs to be a focus on recording all instances of gender-based violence so that the true scale can be understood and monitored over time. It's just something that is so taken for granted that that it seems like no one is really looking at it and measuring it properly, certainly from within the sector. So we're hoping for a big response, or, certainly we were hoping in this report to draw attention to this and to try to mobilise change along with a whole range of other kinds of change that's happening in society and our culture at the moment around these discussions of gender-based violence being no longer invisible and no longer able to be ignored.
Dr. Coffey, what do you mean by gender-based violence? What is that?
So gender-based violence is any kind of violence that's related to a person's gender position. So it can include sexual, physical, mental and economic harm, and it's always rooted in gendered inequality and the abuse of power and harmful norms. So it's always around, the ways that people are unequally positioned in relation to their gender, rather than, their gender being the excuse or the cause for the violence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in this sense, we're not talking about violence necessarily only in the physical sense.
Gender-based violence includes sexual harassment and includes physical abuse as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yeah, it includes harassment, yeah.
Okay, but not limited to physical violence and harassment. I imagine young people in this sector, for instance, deal with a lot of verbal issues that can come up.
Exactly. So it doesn't have, it's similar to, similar to how we understand gender-based violence broadly in society. It can include, more broadly, that takes in domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, all of those. But in the hospitality industry, it certainly includes verbal sexual harassment as well as physical violence and, threats of violence, which is another key thing that we found examples of in our study.
Well, we hear that hospitality is in need of workers, and addressing issues like this would go away to that. Let's stay in touch and see what comes as a result of your work. And thanks for explaining it to us.
No problem.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks. Dr. Julia Coffey, a sociologist at the University of Newcastle.